here with the news for March 8, 2022. Happy International Women's Day. Moving on to the first news, the government of Tigray issued a statement on Monday congratulating Fatou Bensouda, Carrie Betty Moringi, and Stephen Ratner following their appointments as commissioners to lead an international investigation into atrocities in Ethiopia. The United Nations Human Rights Council had passed a resolution in mid-December that called for the formation of an international investigative team tasked with the responsibility of conducting an independent investigation into alleged human rights violations in Ethiopia starting from November 3, 2020. The statement said that the government of Tigray joins international calls to urge the Ethiopian government to reverse its opposition to an independent investigation and said failure to do so amounts to an admission of guilt. The statement reaffirmed the government's commitment to cooperating with the investigative team and said that it believed the Commission will fulfill its responsibility with utmost integrity and in accordance with the Council's established working methods and procedures. The Global Society of Tigrayan Scholars and Professionals issued a statement on Tuesday expressing its solidarity with the people of Ukraine and condemning the position of the Eritrean and Ethiopian government regarding the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Eritrea was one of the 4 countries to vote against the UN's resolution condemning the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and calling for an immediate withdrawal. In an act GSTS referred to as cowardly, Ethiopia refrained from casting a vote, failing to participate in the General Assembly's meeting on Wednesday. Aragay Gabramikael has put this report together. The Global Society of Tigrayan Scholars and Professionals issued a statement expressing solidarity with the people of Ukraine and its administration for Russian citizens that have openly condemned the invasion and called for peace, saying the attack on Ukraine has taken the world to the brink of an apocalyptic conflict. The statement also condemned the Ethiopian and Eritrean government for their positions on Russia-Ukraine crisis. Eritrea was one of the 4 countries to vote against the UN resolution calling for Russia's immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. On the other hand, Ethiopia refrained from casting a vote, failing to participate in the General Assembly's meeting on Wednesday. The statement said the Ethiopian government's actions were not only cowardly, but indicated that the Ethiopian government planned to provide tactical support for the invasion on Ukraine. The statement also condemned widespread violations of rules of conflict by Russian forces that have so far targeted hospitals, civilian homes, and infrastructures. The statement also requested that the United Nations Security Council pay similar attention to the crisis in Tigray that has left over 7 million people in crisis. The British Parliament marked this year's International Women's Day under the theme Beyond Surviving. The House heard from the former Ethiopian Minister for Women and Children, Filsan Abdi, that resigned from her cabinet position after Ethiopian authorities suppressed a report by the ministry that brought to light the scale and the gruesome nature of the violence committed on women in Tigray. The session concluded calling on the UN security to take decisive action to end gross violations of human rights to ensure accountability. For a report by Aragay Gabramikael, Salome Takhlai presents.
The year-long war waged against the people of Tigray was characterized by extrajudicial mass killings, deliberate destruction of social infrastructures, the use of hunger through blockade, and rape as a weapon of war. This year's International Women's Day was celebrated by the British Parliament, highlighting the extreme sexual violence inflicted during the Tigray war under the theme that goes Beyond Surviving. Beyond Surviving was held at Westminster, and the participants were heard spreading accounts and stories of extreme sexual violence against women and girls in Tigray by Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers. The shared accounts and stories were so shocking and disturbing, as they were stories about the gang-raped women by groups of soldiers. Girls as young as 8 years of age being raped, the mutilation of women's genitalias, in order to prevent them from ever giving birth to Tigrayan children. The meeting was accompanied by a speech from a former Ethiopian Women's and Children's Minister, Filsan Abdullahi. According to Filsan, the 16 months-long conflict in Ethiopia has shown the savagery of sexual violence and barbarism that Tigrayan women suffered through.
The 16-month-long Ethiopian conflict has shown the savagery of sexual violence and barbarism that women suffer in war. it has undoubtedly demonstrated the lack of tangible protective mechanisms to safeguard women and girls in conflict settings. I found this to be the case while I was serving as a Minister of Women, Children and Youth.
Filson also said that she met survivors of sexual violence, including girls as young as 10 years of age, during her visit in Mekelle, the capital of Tigray, following the initial assault of the central government.
On my first visit to Mekelle, following the initial assault by government forces, I met with young women and girls as young as 10-year-olds who were raped by Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers. The hospitalized women and girls who shared their horror stories were manifested by their evident scars and wounds. The young girls were so violently raped, they sustained severe injuries, such as fistula and emotional trauma. I saw the hurt, anguish, and broken spirits behind their eyes.
According to Filson, the sexual violence committed against women of Tigray was systematic and premeditated.
Beyond the horrific and brutal acts of sexual violence, the women and girls of Tigray suffered. There was something systematic about the rapes. It felt premeditated.
Filson also condemned the complete silence and the attempt to distort the investigation of the accounts of sexual violence by the Ethiopian government.
And the complicit silence that followed and the attempt to thwart investigations and block the resulting report was damning. I quickly became at odds with the Prime Minister's office and the Prosperity Party leadership after the reports. Of course, I tried to work with the system to help Tigray women and girls.
Lord David Alton was also the other speaker at the parliamentary meeting as co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Eritrea. Alton said that the UK government needs to do more to ensure that those responsible for these appalling crimes should be brought to justice. He also stated that the UN Security Council and UN Human Rights Council have often failed miserably in upholding the Convention on the Crime of Genocide.
According to a report by the UN in 2019, 650 million women were married as children, and every day more than 500 women and girls died during pregnancy and childbirth, indicating that while the world has made a significant progress towards attaining women's sexual and reproductive rights, there needs to be much desired. Our reporter Winta Kidane looks at how reproductive rights of women have been affected due to the ongoing siege on Tigray that has blocked off essential medical supplies from coming into the region, significantly impacting women's physical and mental health.
That people are able to have a satisfying and safe sexual life, and that they have the capacity to reproduce and the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. Reproductive health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity in all matters relating to the reproductive system and to its functions and processes. Women's sexual and reproductive health is related to multiple human rights, including the right to life, the right to be free from torture, the right to health, the right to privacy, the right to education, and the prohibition of discrimination. The Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women have both clearly indicated that women's right to health includes their sexual and reproductive health. This means that states have obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill rights related to women's sexual and reproductive health. Not only does protecting the reproductive rights of women gives couples the ability to decide when and how many children to have, but according to research, it is the most effective means of empowering women.
Maybe if when I say reproductive health is at the center, at the same time, I prefer to see it in relation to other women rights issues. First comes reproductive health, as I said. Maybe specifically you can say family planning for women to have the choice when to have children and how many. That's very basic. And then together with that, women's rights to property, because in many countries, you know, in many countries they may not be even allowed to own land, and women's rights to equal opportunity, to jobs, employment opportunity, which is key because they can contribute greatly to economic development, and then rights to even political involvement, starting from the grassroots in the parliament and so on, and then rights related to education and so on. So when you see reproductive health in relation to these all rights, then you can have actually a better impact, be it food security, which is actually the minimum, to even one's country's economic progress and prosperity. Because you cannot really shut off 50% of the workforce that can contribute to the economic growth. As I said, I support, I care, because it's good for the country. And the other issue is it can also be related to climate, reproductive health easily, and to environment. Because with population growth, you know, what can happen to the environment, and then as a result, what can happen to the climate, and then what can happen to this small world that seemingly looks really big. And then the other factor, the education, that can be also linked with reproductive health.
Despite international laws and the clear economic and social benefits, the violation of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights are frequent. These take many forms, including denial of access to services that only women require, poor quality services, forced sterilization, forced virginity examinations, and forced abortion without women's prior consent, female genital mutilation, and early marriage. Nearly half the women and adolescent girls in developing countries are denied the right to decide whether or not to have sex with their partners, use contraception, or seek health care, according to a report by the United Nations. While the progress that has been achieved and women's rights over the past 25 years has contributed to reducing poverty and hunger and improving education and health globally, some 650 million women are married as children, and every day more than 500 women and girls die during pregnancy and childbirth, according to United Nations report in November 2019.
Because that's important. I think another commitment we've made very clearly is that we will use every opportunity possible to ensure that people understand that development cannot take place without sexual and reproductive health and rights of its people. And so centering that in all the discourses, and particularly on the movement around ensuring universal health coverage. Country after country has a movement to ensure that everybody gets access to health and quality health. And we feel that fundamental to achieving that means you have to achieve health for young people and women who many times don't get that coverage because they're not able to afford it, and therefore we're going to put sexual and reproductive health central to the universal health coverage agenda.
The rapid expansion of infrastructures in Ethiopia, including healthcare and education, has meant that women in Tigray are making healthier and more informed decisions for their own well-being and the well-being of their family.
It makes sense actually when you go down to the family. After we have started this very aggressive family planning program in Ethiopia, women started to have more time to be involved in economic activities. And we had a focus group discussion with men, and one of the men was saying, he told us, you know, initially I used to oppose family planning, but now I fully support, because my wife has more time to work not even far away from home, but in her compound, keeping honeybee, small irrigation to grow vegetables, and earn some money. So there was one person, a breadwinner in that home, in that family, and because of family planning, she got more time and she started to become a breadwinner. and less children, less mouths to feed, so more quality of life in the family. This is how the husband himself witnessed the change. And above all, he said, with less children, I'm having more attention. Because he didn't need to compete with many children, which is correct. Something that he understood in a very simplified way.
The conflict in Tigray that has targeted essential basic services, including health facilities, has meant that much of these gains have now been lost. The destruction of health facilities, an all-encompassing siege on the region that has blocked off fuel and put Tigray under a complete communications blackout, has meant that the violence inflicted on women during the 8 months-long occupation of the region by hostile forces is largely underreported. A report from Insecurity Insight noted that nearly a third of survivors were threatened with a further violence if they sought help or reported the assaults, providing a powerful incentive to keep quiet. There have also been threats against those who are providing care and drawing attention to war-related sexual violence. Insecurity Insight reported that a therapist providing care to a survivor was also threatened with a violence if he attempted to identify Eritrean soldiers as the perpetrators of this attack. The systematic and deliberate destruction of health facilities, the depletion of medicine and medical supplies in Tigray due to the total blockade has made life of women in Tigray almost impossible. Access to basic sanitary pads, contraceptives, abortion pills is limited or expensive to purchase due to the siege.
The mass and arbitrary detention of Tigrayans living across different parts of Ethiopia has devastated families across the country that have been exposed to illnesses and financial hardships. Our reporters spoke with Tigrayan residents of Kombolcha, Amhara region that say the arbitrary and indefinite detention of Tigrayans has continued till this day. For reports by Aragawi Gabra Mikhail, Mirane Mana.
Suffering at detention camps without charges. Eyewitnesses from Kombolcha said that the detainees are concentrated in a far place outside the city of Kombolcha without getting enough food and clean water to drink.
There are more than 200 Tigrayan detainees around the road from Kombolcha to Marabite. They have no one to visit them. They don't have even food and clean water to drink. And they have no access to clinics when they feel ill. They were arrested there for more than 6 months. I found them there accidentally when I was on a field work. All of them are arrested and suffocated in containers without getting enough food and water. I don't know to whom to report such kind of injustices.
According to the eyewitness, the age range of detainees is estimated to be between 25 to 70, and 40% among them are females.
The age of the detainees is between 25 to 60 and 70, and 40% of them are females. They are all detained forcibly. There is no one to visit them, and most of them are forcibly arrested from Kombolcha and neighboring cities like Dassi.
Another eyewitness from residents of Kombolcha also said that there are still around 26 Tigrayan prisoners arrested in a place known as Alami at Kombolcha.
I was born and raised in Kombolcha. Whether someone is Tigrayan or Amhara, Muslim or Christian, we used to live in peace in the city. Following the war, however, there are still 26 Tigrayans in prison, in a place known as Alami. I don't know why they are still at prison, as most of the detained Tigrayans were released from prisons recently, so I wish if they too could be released. I have no idea why they kept them imprisoned, why they released the others.
An eyewitness who has been living in Kombolcha for around 35 years also said that the Tigrayan prisoners in Alami are suffering from different diseases and starvation.
I have lived in Kombolcha for around 35 years now. Most of the detainees were our neighbors who lived with us for decades. They were imprisoned due to the ongoing war in our country. Some of them are still in prison in the place known as Alami, as many of them were released recently. I don't know why they are still languishing in prison while others are released. We were expecting that they would be released by now. They have not. The prisoners constitute from young ones to elders, and they are still suffering from different diseases and starvation. We wish if there is someone who can rescue them.
In January, a report from Human Rights Watch also revealed that thousands of Tigrayan migrant workers in Saudi Arabia were locked at detention camps and forcibly disappeared after they've been deported to Ethiopia.
The gruesome nature of violence committed against women in Tigray has been a telling feature of the genocidal intent of the conflict in Tigray. Women in Tigray were subjected to horrific acts of sexual violence that included gang rape, sexual slavery, and the insertion of odd objects inside a woman's reproductive organs. The systematic destruction of health facilities and the siege have further exacerbated the situation, as survivors have been denied access to essential healthcare needs, including termination of pregnancy, treatments for HIV and hepatitis B, and traumatic fistula, as well as for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. Salome Tigrai has more for us.
For much of history, rape in conflict was understood as unfortunate but inevitable byproduct of war. Over the past few decades, however, the world has come to recognize that sexual violence can and is used as a weapon of war. The use of sexual violence as a weapon of war is meant to signify a situation in which women of a certain group are targeted for sexual violence so as to achieve military or political objectives, as in, for example, the Rwandan genocide. In the Rwandan genocide, the Interahamwe would subject massive number of Tutsi women to sexual violence. This was done with the intention of terrorizing and eradicating the Tutsi community. Another example is the Darfur genocide, where rape was used as a method of cleansing black Africans from the region. Mabrahtom Fitoui, a legal expert, says that rapes committed in public places and having similar patterns and gang rape could be indicators of the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war.
If the rape is committed, for example, publicly, then it can be said that the one who is committing that rape has a confidence on certain system, on certain organization. So if it is public, for example, we can say that it is systematic. If it has similar pattern, then it might indicate that there is certain systemic way of doing it for certain purpose. If it is also, if you take, for example, gang rape, usually when a rape is made by more than one, there is high probability of it is possible that it can be established in the court of law or in anyone. So unless they have a confidence on a certain system, on a certain organization, it's less probable that gang rape will not be committed. So gang rape can also be one indicator of systematic kind of rape.
The 16 months long communications blackout in Tigray, as well as the systematic destruction of health facilities across the state, has meant that neither government nor aid agency are able to grasp the magnitude of the violence on women in Tigray. But former Ethiopian Minister for Women and Children's Affairs, Filson Abdi, says she resigned from her position after an investigation by the ministry on widespread allegations of sexual violence had revealed the gruesome nature of the violence on women in Tigray by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces.
Beyond the horrific and brutal acts of sexual violence, the women and girls of Tigray suffered. There was something systematic about the rapes. It felt premeditated. And the complicit silence that followed and the attempts to thwart investigations and block the resulting report was damning. I quickly became at odds with the Prime Minister's office and the Prosperity Party leadership after the reports. Of course, I tried to work with the system to help Tigray women and girls. But any request for assistance and funds on our emergency action plan to gender-based violence and child protection for Tigray was ignored by the Ministry of Finance and all other relevant stakeholders, agencies.
Mabrahtom says that rape has not only been used as a weapon of war, but says there is sufficient reason to believe that sexual violence was being used as a tool to commit genocide against the people of Tigray.
It seems that rape has been used as, well, I can say, weapon of genocide. Not weapon of war, but weapon of genocide. If we consider certain indicators, like for example, in certain instances when they rape, they have said that they are raping to purify their blood. If they are raping to purify their blood, this cannot be a weapon of war. It's not to win the war. It is to purify their blood, and that's genocide. You can, for example, see from certain sources that after raping certain women, if they insert, for example, foreign things into their vagina, that also indicates that they are trying to prevent birth. At least they are incapacitating her. So in such circumstance also, it can indicate genocide, because in the genocide definition, preventing birth among the group is considered as an act of genocide.
In a report on August 2021, Amnesty International would illustrate in detail why it believed sexual violence was being used as a weapon of war in the conflict in Tigray, saying that it was clear that rape and sexual violence have been used as a weapon of war to inflict lasting physical and psychological damage on women and girls in Tigray. Hundreds have been subjected to brutal treatment aimed at degrading and dehumanizing them. The report from Amnesty also indicated that there was widespread use of sexual violence to terrorize and humiliate the victims and their ethnic group, and those women were held captives for several days while the soldiers took turns raping them. The attack on women in Tigray was exacerbated further by Ethiopian authorities attempting to belittle and justify the violence on women in Tigray in an attempt to evade responsibility.
ትግራይ ስላለው ችግር የሚሰቃዩ ሰዎች የሰሜን ዕዝ ጥቃት በሚመለከት ምንም አያነሱ። ሰሜን ዕዝ እንኳን ተጠቀም ተዋረደ። ሴቶች እኮ አሁን በወንድ የተደፈሩት የኛ ወታደሮች ግን በሳንጃ ተደፍረዋል።
Another gruesome violation on women has been the deliberate destruction of health facilities in Tigray that has significantly reduced women's access to health care. This, in addition to an 8-month-long siege on Tigray that has blocked off essential medical supplies, has meant that survivors are unable to receive much-needed care. In a statement in November of 2020, Human Rights Watch had said that the torment of survivors of gender-based violence was further exacerbated due to lack of access to medical assistance, saying that survivors require access to essential healthcare needs, including termination of pregnancy, treatment for HIV and hepatitis B, and care for broken bones, stab wounds, and traumatic fistula, and support for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. But the destruction of health facilities across the region and the presence of soldiers in checkpoints near health facilities during the 8-month-long occupation of the region had made it impossible for survivors to receive care. Mulu Masfin, a nurse at Tigray's only one-stop center, says that even if survivors were to somehow make it to health center, lack of essential medical supplies meant that women would receive limited care.
800 clinics are done still now, from the war till now. 300 of them are late pregnancy, are coming for termination or abortion. There is no any medication. There are different types of diseases that are acquired. Chronic diseases like HIV. There is no any medication. And the medical supplies. There is no any nutritious. Like plumpnet. They are very in starvation.
The use of rape as a weapon of war, coupled with a systematic attack of public infrastructures and the discontinuation of basic services, has had a devastating impact on the most vulnerable members of the community, especially women and children. International media outlets and human rights groups have been at the center of documenting these atrocities and their grave human impact, but the world has continued to fail to take decisive action to ensure these atrocities come to an end.
Moving on, Michaela Girmay was a resident of Al-Asa, a small village in northwest of Maqala, Tigray's capital. But this is before his mother was killed by Eritrean forces, leaving the young boy orphaned and with limited options to fulfill basic necessities. For Haile Gabru's report, Salome Tkhlai.
His name is Michaela Girmay. He's a 10-year-old child. Michaela was in grade 3 while the Ethiopian and Eritrean invading forces stormed into Al-Asa, a small village located in northwest of Maqala, the capital of Tigray, in the month of November 2020. Following their invasion, Michaela was intending to leave Al-Asa along with his pregnant mother and his grandmother. Though he had left his village for 4 days, long alone thinking the enemy would do nothing over him, his mother had stayed at home. Just 4 days later, while Michaela came back home, he had seen bodies fell like leaves in autumn while he was on his way home, including his pregnant mother and her neighbor. Michaela, whose pregnant mother has been deceased in a horrific manner, has the will to tell the story like this.
I just found 6 bodies on a street around our village. Then I put on clothes and leaves on them and went into my home. Unfortunately, my pregnant mother and other from our neighborhood were killed inside our home in a barbaric manner. Then I made a mattress and put a towel over their bodies too. Minutes later, I left out my home cleaning all my tears as if I didn't cry because the Eritrean soldiers were there out. It was heartbreaking. My heart is bleeding when the flashback of the horrors come to my mind.
Mr. Girmay, Michaela's father's whereabouts is not known yet since the beginning of the war in Tigray. Now, Michaela has been obliged to live alone. He has been starved to death for the fact that no one could be able to look after him for months. Right after several hurdles of life, he is sheltered in an IDP camp in Maqala.
I was the only child to my mother. My father was living here in Maqala. Right after my mother's days, I used her to shift for some time. Then a bus conductor whom I closely know has brought me to Maqala for the first time. Therefore, I have got the opportunity to join the IDPs.
Teacher Salam Abadi, a volunteer who teaches children in one of the IDP camps in Maqala, has identified Michaela's current situation and made a communication with Deacon Fitzum Hailu, her house lesser. Currently, Michaela is living out of the IDP center and started a new life. Teacher Salam said that many other children like that of Michaela are abandoned due to the fact that their beloved family members have been killed brutally. Teacher Salam speaks her mind regarding the horrors of the conflict in Tigray and children's miserable life as follows.
There are students who have seen many tragic incidents, particularly children from Maikadra and Humara who came to Maqala have arrived here stepping on dead bodies. In the very instance, such children were not interested in attending classes because they had put a bad picture in their mind about the horrific journey which they had till they arrived here. Now, they are psychologically traumatized.
Deacon Fitzum Hailu, who looks after Michaela, says that those that can help the orphanage, the needy as well, should demonstrate their commitment in cherishing their helping hands. Deacon Fitzum added that the aim of Abiy Ahmed's government and its allies is just to exterminate future generations of Tigray through man-made starvation.
Now, we brought him from the IDP center. We will share all what we have together. If his father sees him on TV, he can come in case he is alive. In my opinion, if you give, you will receive in return. Thus, I want to convey a message that children in Tigray demands your help. Hunger gives no time. Let's support for those who need to be helped.
Michaela's shocking story is the proper replica of other children across Tigray. In connection to this, there are also thousands of children in Tigray who have shared a heartbreaking story, though not yet uncovered for different reasons.
Daga Hebret in northwestern Tigray has seen countless atrocities committed by Eritrean forces, including massacres, looting, and the use of rape as a weapon of war. Our reporters were able to uncover the unspeakable atrocities committed by Eritrean forces in the area. For a report by Fanuel Imru, again Salomit Khalai.
The conflict in Tigray has been marked by numerous human rights violations, ranging from lootings to the ethnic cleansing campaigns carried out by Ethiopian forces alongside with their Eritrean allies. Daga Hebret is a vicinity found in northwestern Tigray, Askeda district, where the Eritrean army killed, looted, and burned civilians and their properties. Residents of this vicinity explain the horrific deeds of the Eritrean soldiers as following.
First, there were soldiers of the Eritrean army who were killed in action. Then the residents here buried them. Aftermath, their comrades arrived here. They gathered 3 civilians and ordered them to dig out the corpses of their comrades. Finally, they killed 3 of them gruesomely, using axes and stones. For instance, we found some part of the axe that the Eritreans used to kill one of the victims stuck in his school.
They killed 21 men. 5 of them were IDPs. Even there were 2 brothers. They killed them both. 17 of the victims were from this vicinity. They also killed a doctor after accusing him of treating Tigrayan forces.
Public infrastructures and civilian properties were also looted, and more than 160 houses were burnt.
They burnt over 160 civilian houses. More than 10 institutions were also burned, including pharmacies to deny the society an access for medication.
They slaughtered 150 cattle